Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I am your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Today we have yet another wonderful interview. We've done the interview and we'll be showing it to you in a little while. This is an interview with, actually, why don't you say the title of our podcast?
Okay, this week's title is Faith and Relationships, an interview with Rabbi and couples therapist, David Fredman.
So we've had that interview and it was just delightful. He's a really interesting guy, Orthodox rabbi and also a couples therapist, and
Right.
we covered a number of really topics that I find very germane to the work that I do, and we hope you'll find it interesting. So before we get to that, we just want to let you, first of all, invite you to let other folks know about the podcast. We did this particular interview because Rabbi Fredman got in touch with us. We didn't know him, but he described himself as a podcast junkie.
And he heard our podcast.
And he liked it.
And he liked it.
He got in touch with us and turned out to be a great interview. So if you want to do that too, let us know. Maybe you'll be on a show, or if you know other folks you think it'd be great for us to interview, please let us know. And of course, tell your friends and engage with our social media posts. And what else are they supposed to do?
Like us on Facebook and like us on wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us, subscribe, share, all that stuff.
Above. And while we're on the subject of our podcast, we've got
Merch.
We've got our Couples Therapy in 7 Words mugs.
In
we
two
have,
sizes.
In 2 sizes, 15 ounces and 11 ounces. We also have t-shirts, which I didn't bother to bring here to hold up, but by golly, we have t-shirts as well, in any size you want. And we actually got the samples, and they're good quality, by golly.
They're
so
wonderful.
Avail yourself of that. You can go to brucechalmer.com/shop for the shop where you can buy our merch. And of course, we also want to tell you about the book that really was the basis for this podcast, these many months ago. It was like a year and a half ago or so that we started this. This is the book.
Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
And here it is in paperback version, and it's also available as an audiobook from the Amazon site where I did the narration myself, so you get to hear my voice doing it. And also as Kindle. I think I mentioned before, the audiobook is really selling even better than the Kindle, which always is interesting. People like it.
People like listening to you.
Indeed. So please watch out for that as well. So let's move without further ado into our interview. You'll hear Judy introducing Rabbi Fredman, introducing himself. This is a bit unique in this one as well.
Unique introduction.
Unique introduction, and then we'll have the interview, and then we will be back after that.
Enjoy the podcast. Our guest today is Rabbi and therapist David Fredman. When we asked him for a bio, he sent us one, and we feel the only way to do it justice is to invite him to read it for us. David, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Nervous my bio would sound kind of lame, as a lot of these can sound quite the same. I thought I'd spice up my bio up a tiny bit with attempting a poem, if time permits. Often what is shared is a highly curated version, as if our humanness and struggles are a mere diversion. Though I'm happy to share some of what I've achieved, I do not want things to be misperceived. I was born in St. Louis, Mo, and perhaps that goes back more than you need to know. Along the way of my journey, I became passionate about life, which connected me deeper to my heritage, to Judaism, and eventually my wife. With a master's in education, it seemed only natural from there to continue to rabbinical school for a total of 7 years. Onwards to Seattle and the Twin Cities to teach and build an organization, all the while counseling, raising kids, as well as adult education. After 11 years of that, I turned my attention to couples work only, listening to people who were together, yet still feeling lonely, loving them so much, wanting them to change and grow, so they could finally express the love that seemed buried deep below. And here I am with Dr. Bruce and Judy, yes, a rabbi and licensed therapist with other family duty. I have some hobbies on the side, which I'm happy to share, and of course, daily study and dedicated time for prayer.
Thank you. That's great.
That is a unique, and in our year plus of doing this, we've never had an intro quite like that. So thank you for that. I almost wondered if it was going to sound sort of like a rap, maybe a Jewish rap or something like that. That was really cool.
Get the Drake in there.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Great. So why don't you tell us how you went from education to rabbinical school and marriage and family? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So, as I said, I kind of became more passionate about my Judaism when I was a late teen. I went to Israel for a gap year and got really inspired. And that really kind of took me along, concerted energy and effort studying in rabbinical school. And eventually I got passionate about doing outreach and community building. So we were in Israel for first 7 years of our marriage. We moved to Seattle to do some community building there. We were there for 4 years, and then to the Twin Cities. And I noticed a lot was happening besides the education and the Jewish community building. A lot of couples and families were coming to me with concerns, with things. And I had some pastoral, I had training as a rabbi, but I realized that there was such a gap in what I could offer my constituents. So I decided to go back to get a second master's in marriage and family therapy, and started seeing clients, getting supervision, seeing clients. And then I just really got so passionate about that I just kind of went focused only in doing that. And so now I kind of do some teaching on the side, in terms of Jewish teaching, but my prime focus is really with couples and families.
Were you a congregational rabbi?
So it was like an outreach and community building, position. I did have a small pulpit in Seattle. In Minneapolis, it was more just the outreach and engagement teaching and kind of some other rabbinical duties that I had as part of the head of this organization.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, it's interesting. There's kind of a parallel I'm not a rabbi, of course, but I'm Jewish, and we're both very involved in the Jewish community. And it turns out, especially living in Vermont, it's a small Jewish community here. So most of the Jewish people who otherwise might want to seek my services, I can't see because I know them. I'm well known in the Jewish community. And I'm wondering, what's that like for you, that I'm going to guess a lot of your clients aren't Jewish, or if they are, they probably aren't Orthodox, maybe more secular. How do you fit that together, your Orthodox practice with working with a lot of secular clients?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I guess the way I think about it is, my responsibility as a therapist is to provide the best therapy that I can with the models that I'm trained in and the work that I do. And sometimes clients are coming to me specifically because I have a background in religion, or sometimes because I'm Jewish. And if that's pertinent to the work for them, then I might throw things in that might be, helpful for them to understand, or share a story or perspective from that. But I really can kind of hold the two in different spaces. I'm sure there's a lot that just naturally of who I am. But in terms of like my actual practice, a lot of it's just focused. My main goal is like, hey, what's really good for these people in front of me? How can I help them the best that I can? And some people are very turned off by religion, and some people are very passionate about it. So I always let them kind of guide my practice and what's going to be included in it.
Yeah, I found it interesting that a lot of very devout Christians are attracted to the fact that they know I'm Jewish, and they find it out pretty quickly, usually in the course
Right.
of the work, because I'm quite open about that.
Sure.
And they like that fact that I'm at least willing to talk about faith,
Right.
because there are a lot of therapists who just seem to kind of go deer in the headlights when the
Yeah.
subject of faith comes up at all. Do
Yeah.
you notice that? It's like religious clients who aren't Jewish, but they
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I think they appreciate that. There's this, I think there's just like a certain kinship that they feel towards me because of that. And that's great. I get religious Christians, religious Muslims, and there's people from just different backgrounds. I think they look at my bio, which says that I'm a recovering rabbi, so as they say. But no, still obviously still have some connection to that. And I think they appreciate that. I think they do appreciate that. And I think sometimes they're specifically seeking me because of that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned that you have an interest in Musar. So I want you to explain that to our listeners, what it is and how it fits in with your practice with your clients.
So Musar, I would say broadly, is kind of the Jewish approach to self-improvement and growth, self-introspection and growth. Really, the founder of Musar, his name is Rabbi Israel Salanter, in the 1800s. He really developed a new kind of approach within this realm of Musar. And the approach is basically, as much as we know things intellectually to be true, somehow it doesn't always translate into our emotions. And as Rabbi Salanter said, the furthest place in the entire universe is between our head and our heart. Mm. And I take that, that's why I appreciate a lot of the EFT work that I do, because it's kind of based on, if you don't get that emotional shift, things aren't going to change, even if you know the right thing to do, or you know the more effective approach with your spouse. So the translating of ideas into our attitudes, into our emotions, is really what strikes home in terms of the relationship between Musar and its relationship to the couples work that I do. I think it really starts with, sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
I just want to translate for the audience EFT, emotionally focused therapy, where we've had the thought of trying to snag Sue Johnson to get her on the show. I haven't even attempted to contact her yet, but if you're out there, we would like to, if she's hearing this or somebody knows they're hearing this, we would love to interview her, because that's really neat stuff. So do you want to say a little more about what EFT is?
Sure. So emotionally focused therapy, I would say the concept is, as one of the trainer that I listened to a lot, her name is Catherine Ream, fantastic therapist. And she says her goal is to be there as a consultant of the process, consultant of the relationship, when one party reaches out to their spouse or their partner and the other person isn't able to be there for them. The experience that we have and the pain and the sadness when our partner's unable for some reason, or unable some reason, to reach back and hold us, and helping clients be able to hold the space for one another, so that when they take the emotional leap off the high dive, their partner knows how to catch them and hold them. That's the imagery I always think about. It'd be a risky thing to jump off a diving board if there's no water in there. You would need 100% guarantee that your spouse or your partner can actually catch you. Emotionally, it takes a lot to leap off, to say hard things, to say your own vulnerabilities. One, to say it, and then two, to be able to know what to do when your partner does say something like that. So it's helping couples develop that emotional connection and safety in the relationship, where they can really say those very hard things and know how to handle themselves in that moment, as well as know how to respond to their partner when they do say those things. Broadly.
I talk a lot about that notion that the chief skill of intimacy is tolerating that very anxiety of taking that risk. That to be able to take, because what a lot of couples, it's kind of the basis of the book I wrote, a lot of the couples that are in stable relationships will avoid taking that risk because it feels too destabilizing, because they don't know if the water's in the pool, they don't know if their partner can catch them. And sometimes their partner isn't real good at catching them. So to be able to manage those moments, and but a lot of the work is about, that's what I'm not trained in EFT specifically, but I remember in reading about it, finding it very consonant with a lot of the ideas that I like, because it's that sense of being able to train people to provide that catching place, to be able to do it, and be able to take the risk, whether or not it's there, to be able to take the risk of doing that, because that's what facilitates intimacy.
That also jives with your idea of faith, and where faith comes into play in the formula. We have our 7-word formula for
I got to show the merch now. So, be kind, don't panic, and have faith. Couples therapy in 7 words. That formula, the faith part of the formula, when I talk about it, I don't mean it necessarily in a religious sense. It's not contradictory to a religious sense, but I mean faith in a very general sense, that somehow, the universe works right. In religious terms, God is, whatever God means, God is good. So life is livable even when it feels very risky. There's somehow you'll be able to get through that, even if you're not quite sure how. That's what lets people take that risk. And that's also what lets people avoid panic. If they know, well, this is risky, but somehow it's going to be okay, then they don't get into panic, and then they can actually possibly be there for their partner when their partner's saying something that may be upsetting or
Yeah.
just difficult. Yeah. This is a bit of a gear shift, but I also noticed in what you sent us about your interest that you're interested in graphology. And I was curious,
Yeah.
what's that all about and where'd that come from?
So that's really interesting. I was applying for a position. My wife and I were applying for a position many years ago. This is 13 years ago or so, and we had to submit a handwriting sample and a tree.
A drawing of a tree, like
drawing of a tree.
because I've heard of the person tree. What is it? Person tree house test or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's similar, right?
Yeah.
And so we sent in our writing to this organization, and they submitted it to their graphologist, their handwriting analyst, which apparently is a much more popular thing in Europe and in Israel than it is here in the United States. But be that as it may, I had an opportunity to sit down with this person who only knew me from what I wrote, just not from what I wrote, from not the content of what I wrote, more than how I wrote. And this man, who happens to be a rabbi in Israel, he was, I'll say it in Yiddish, I'll say the word in Yiddish and then explain it. He was in my kishkes, meaning he was like he knew me like from the inside out. And it was a very unnerving, it was a positively unnerving experience. That
Can I ask, was the writing in Hebrew or English?
It was in English. It was in English.
Okay.
Although he does Hebrew as well. And I was so, because it wasn't just like broad things. It wasn't like you're a nice guy or not. It was like delicate things about my own psyche, my own personality that I was like, oh my gosh, that's like just, it was a very, very crazy experience. I would not personally, if I was listening to me, I wouldn't believe this. Meaning if I didn't have this experience, I just think it's crazy.
Yeah.
And at that time I said to this person, I said, would you be willing to train me in what you just did? And he said, no. And so I was like, okay, bummer, he's like, I don't really have the time right now. And it's a big investment of time and energy. And it's financially, I was a rabbinical student. I mean, you'd be surprised. You don't quite make a lot of money as a rabbinical student. I'm just joking. I'm not surprised. So no, he can't. But he's a well-known person in Israel, and a lot of people go to him, and I've sent a lot of people to him, and there's always positive feedback, and people are really blown away by his skill set. And I've used him a number of times for personal, professional things over the years. I read a lot of books after I met him because I was really enamored. Because it's just such a different, it seems very heebie-jeebie. And I spoke to a lot of people that I respected, and therapists, and people that I know gave me the same general answer of like the legitimacy of it in general, which was, they said everything that a human being does reveals aspects of their personality. What we wear, how we dress, what we drive, how we speak, how we carry ourselves, all the things that we pick up intuitively, they're all kind of our personality is dribbling out all over the place. And it includes handwriting as well. That doesn't mean everybody that claims to know how to understand other people through handwriting are legitimate, but conceptually, that resonated for me. And also just what I've experienced with him. So over the years, I've asked him multiple times if he'd be willing to train me or teach me. And every time he pushed me off and he said, I can't do it right now, I don't have time, etc. And then about a couple years, 2-3 years ago, I said to him, I used him again. I'm like, I've asked you a couple of times over the years, is there any chance? I kind of gave up hope. I'm like, this is the last time I'm asking him. Any chance you'd be willing to take me on as a student? He's 70 years old. I'm like, you're getting on. You don't have any students that you've trained. And he said, I've got a little bit of time right now. Send me your writing. I want to see if you could learn how to do this. I mean, he's going to assess whether I can actually do it or not through my writing. So he sends me an email a couple of days later, and he says, I'm happy to take you on as a student. I told my wife I felt like I got accepted to Harvard at that moment.
Yeah, there you go.
And so I been studying with him. I've studied with him weekly, just to keep getting the training and just keep honing the skill. It's been amazing for me because I feel like I start off in a different spot with my clients, because I have my clients submit a handwriting sample for me to start things off. So I have a better clarity of like what's going on inside to just start the work. People come to me for other reasons as well. Sometimes people want to know about themselves. They want to know about their prospective dating partner. And as you know, in the Jewish world, there's shidduchim. A lot of people get set up in a certain sense. They want to know what they're getting themselves into. Did I marry the axe murderer? Am I marrying the axe murderer? As well as sometimes people use it for business purposes. They want to understand, we're about to hire somebody and a CEO or something like that. What are the relative strengths and weaknesses of these different of these people based on their writing? So it's been a very interesting road learning from this teacher, and his name is Rabbi Tom Meyer in Israel, and just his insight as well into the human psyche is also really, really uncanny. So,
wow. Yeah, interesting stuff. It's interesting as you're describing it, because I would certainly start out as a skeptic, as indeed sounds like you did too.
Yeah.
But that concept that, certainly when you hear someone speaking, how they speak is you can understand things about their, like you said, personality dribbles out all over the place, and similarly how they present themselves in various ways. So I guess it stands to reason how one writes, how one expresses oneself through that mode, one of many different modes of expression, you could actually, learn some tendencies. I am an old statistician. Before I was a psychologist, I was a statistician, and there's still that part of me that says I want to see the data. I want to see the predictive data, but some, actually you can say similar things to this in terms of applying. I mean, astrology, for example, which I don't think has much science behind it, but nevertheless, the idea of viewing things through a structure is often a helpful way of understanding one's own thoughts about it.
Sure.
So I can imagine it from that perspective. But you've given me some insights into graphology that I hadn't had before. It's an interesting thought. I'm remembering, seeing how various people write, and sometimes you do get that sense of, wow, that's kind of an expression of who that person is.
Yeah,
So.
I know. I wonder what my handwriting says about me.
If you look at like him or hate him, I'm not bringing that in for the political aspect of it. If you look at the past president,
that's the one.
Look at the signature of him. Right?
I've seen that. Yeah,
it's an unrelenting.
Yeah.
Signature. It's so, and right, right. It stands.
Yeah, I've seen it. It looks like that up and down, like
that pressure, that unrelenting pressure. Because part of what we look at is the variance in pressure of the writing is because there's something behind this person. This person will not let up. Mm-hmm. So like it or hate it, but I'm saying we're not looking at the tendency, the human tendency, the tendencies of the person.
Yeah.
Based on it. So I could talk a lot about this.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. This might be a good time to segue to our listener question.
I think it is.
So here comes a listener question.
Okay. So Jessica writes, Dear Dr. Chalmer, I'm a 32-year-old woman involved with a man around the same age. Neither of us has been married before. We are both Jewish, but we have different levels of observance. I have become more observant over the past few years. Before I met Raymond, I attend Shabbat services, I participate in a daily minyan, I keep kosher. Raymond is secular and not very involved. What's your experience dealing with couples when there's a difference in their levels of observance? Does the one who's more observant have to give in to the one who isn't observant? Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I said when I saw that. And then you contacted us. Like, oh, great.
It's like, oh.
So obviously this person really cares about her partner. And I guess here's a couple things that I think about. I think she said, does the one who's always religious have to give in? Was that the language?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think let's look at anything that a couple has differences of opinion on. Starting with how do we reconcile the fact that, one person's an extrovert and wants to go out every Saturday night, and one person's an introvert and would rather sit and watch Netflix.
Oh, you know.
So, no, I know myself. Got the most extroverted wife in the world. How do you reconcile that? Even within the same religious level. So we'll start to look at it as a relationship. How do we navigate the differences that we have. If this is important, if Shabbat is important, I've heard of couples that have great marriages, even if they're on very different, religious planes, because there's a baseline of I respect my partner, I value my partner, and if I didn't do those things, then what does it say about me? Right? It means that I'm choosing a partner that I don't respect. Like, what does that say about me? So once we start with this basis of I respect the other, and even though their value system is not completely in sync with mine, they're my partner. And so learning how to accommodate one another's preferences, desires, needs, and being able to have really open, explicit dialogue about the meaning of those things with each other. So that, let's say he says, I don't care about kosher, but would you be willing to help accommodate because this is meaningful to me? And he says, well, would you be willing to go to this party or something like that? So they're probably going to have to be both extending themselves out of their general comfort zone, but who doesn't have to do that in marriage?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that certainly makes sense. And, it's always interesting. I do encounter this occasionally in various settings, not only in a Jewish setting, but it is interesting when it's not only a question of a difference when they get together, but often it's a question of an evolution that happens while they're together, where somebody is becoming more observant or less observant for that matter, and trying to accommodate those kinds of differences. I thought it was interesting with this particular letter because she mentioned she's 32 years old. Now, again, we don't know any more about this than what we have here, but a 32-year-old woman getting involved with a man around the same age, they haven't been married, I'm guessing the question of children may come up. And then it becomes really interesting. How do you deal with the kids if one person is, say, Shomer Shabbos and the other isn't, or any of those kinds of things that can come up, Shomer Shabbos meaning keeping the Sabbath observers. How do you manage those kinds of differences, when there are kids? Because I think a lot of those values differences really get crystallized when it becomes something about kids.
Sure.
But it doesn't only have to be about kids. I mean, it could be something, she might want to go to services Saturday morning. He might want to go out antiquing. And that's where you can also have difference of what they want to do together. If she's going to Daily Minyan and she's going to Sabbath services and she's wanting to keep kosher and he's wanting to have shrimp, how do you navigate all that?
Yeah.
David?
So no perfect answer.
Darn.
One thing I like to I tell my couples a lot is and maybe my wife taught this to me. She certainly has taught it to me in practice. But love is what's important to you is important to me. And I can't disregard the fact that, let's say this example, the fact that Sabbath is important to you, honey. Like part of the maturing of the relationship is that I acknowledge that, and I'm willing to extend myself into that other party's world. There's certainly things that there's a point that Dr. William Glasser makes in his book Choice Theory, which I would highly recommend. And he basically says, like, I use my own words. When you decide to get married, I always say this to my couples, with the period of the word I do, at that moment, you basically forfeited up to 50% of your general preferences. Because if Judy wants, 1, 3, and 5, and you want 2, 4, and 6, if these are mutually exclusive things, you're going to get about half of them. And so if you want your way all the time, then there's an easy way to do that. Don't be with somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Don't try and be in a long-term committed relationship.
Because you're going to have to give up in order to, and don't feel terrible about it. When you give up 50% of your general preferences, or up to, it doesn't necessarily mean you will, you're getting back something, which is the relationship. And so
I say that about monogamy itself. Monogamy can be viewed as this enormous restriction where you're saying, well, okay, I've denied myself to billions of people on earth for the sake of being with one person who can't possibly be the same as billions. There's always other people who offer other things besides what we offer each other. But the payback for that is there are things you get with monogamy you can't get any other way.
Right.
There's a level of intimacy that's possible there that I think it's not possible any other way.
And so when we think about this couple, and I start to think, okay, like I don't think she should have to forfeit everything. I don't think he should have to forfeit it. He wants to go antiquing, or either he's not interested or doesn't want to, or he's not ready to, whatever it is. It's like, okay, that might be where he's at. For her to impose on him, that's certainly going to have him pull away, because I don't want to be forced to be religious. And if she's imposing he's imposing his way, like, well, that's not the kind of life I lead. Now, obviously, they're in a stage of their relationship where they're going to have to really have some honest dialogue about these points to get to a place of like, can this be our long-term partner? I think it's possible, and certainly has been, and there's definitely people who have relationships like that. But I think it's really important to have open, explicit dialogue about it, so that, a couple of years down the line, if she's continuing to head it in this trajectory, that it doesn't become, tremendous friction.
Yeah, it is a tricky thing. I actually am remembering years ago, I had a good friend who was an Orthodox rabbi whose wife was Jewish, but not at all observant. And they made a go of it. And neither one of them started out Orthodox. He was sort of Bel Tshuva and she just wasn't. But they made a go of it. And he, last I heard, it's been a while since I've talked to them, but they were doing fine. So it certainly is possible.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there are those couples for whom this kind of thing, especially early on, I guess, becomes a deal breaker. It's like, wow, we're two good people, but our values don't line up enough so that we can feel okay in this relationship. And,
and we also know intermarried couples that practice their own religion, but because I used to work at a temple. I was the education director for many years, so I've come across many intermarriages where there's a Jewish parent and a Christian practicing parent who have agreed to raise the children Jewish and have had successful marriages and, very successful child rearing in Judaism too.
Yeah, it can happen.
It can happen, but you're right. They have to be on the same page and in agreement.
Yeah.
To what
explicitly. And so the challenge sometimes is that, you think one thing day one and then a year later. Obviously, it's tricky to navigate, but it is, it is doable. I'm just saying what I'm saying, just back up a little bit. A year later, you might be like, I thought this wasn't so important to me, but actually it really is. I thought I'd be able to really raise our kids this way, but man, seeing that my family gets together for Christmas and we're not there, or my family gets together for Passover and we're not there, gosh, I'm having some second thoughts about it. It obviously becomes harder later on when the norms have been established already. But
I've had occasion to work with a couple that's considerably older than this, got together, later on, I think either widowed or divorced, that kind of situation. And one of the pair had been Catholic before, but got much more devout in her Catholicism and decided they were living in sin because she hadn't been, her previous marriage hadn't been annulled, and told her partner, we can't do this anymore. And her priest basically told her, you have to live as brother and sister until you can actually get married. And that was very difficult for them.
Sure. Gosh.
Not surprising. So, these things can come up. Yeah.
Wow.
What else should we be asking you about? Like, what else would you like to comment on?
You touched on, kind of the relationship, monogamous relationship, those kind of things. Maybe it'd be appropriate just to share a little bit from the I guess Orthodox perspective. We have a little bit of a different dating system. Now, there are different tracks within Orthodoxy. So I want to be clear. I'm not speaking for every Orthodox Jew, and I'm not speaking for every Orthodox sect. There's Hasidic Jew Orthodox, and there's Yeshiva Orthodox, and there's modern Orthodox, and they all have a little bit of different. They do have very different stripes and flavors. But there's a concept.
Where do you yourself in that?
I'm probably affiliated with the Yeshiva Orthodox.
I would have guessed.
You're sort
you
of
have
giving
that yeshivish vibe.
Yeshivish vibe. I'm not that good at picking that up. So, you don't seem Hasidic, but beyond that, I wasn't sure which way to go.
So, the concept of shidduchim is kind of I think it's a little bit of a misunderstood idea, but I think there is something special about it, where shidduchim are, matchmaking. My wife and I were set up. Basically, a mutual friend recommended us for each other. There's a lot of background that happens in that kind of in that stream of Orthodoxy, or those streams of Orthodoxy that do things like that, where a lot makes sense on paper before you actually go on a date. You have full right to say you don't want to be with this person, and you go on dates specifically, at least in the communities that I run with, you go on dates specifically to see, is there the chemistry? Do we think it could work? But you're actually not going to be dating until it actually like makes sense on paper. The family's background, whatever, different things, values, culture, we don't want to, and so part of the thinking, and I think I think there's something special about this. Part of the thinking is that whenever we are interacting with another person, let's say in this case, a person of the opposite gender, and we're looking to date them for marriage, really is, of course it applies to all, everybody, but I'm just saying in terms of the orthodox dating, when we're dating somebody, we're going to put our hearts out to somebody else. And to put my heart in somebody else's hands when it's not really realistic that I'm going to, take it to the next level, i.e. be serious about marriage. Like I'm putting my heart at risk for a not necessary reason. It's risky business. And so that's why there's this like, why are they checking everything out and checking families out and checking values, all this thing is because I don't want to put my heart in somebody else's hands if there's nothing that's going to come out of it. There's an aspect of like, we don't touch each other before marriage. We don't kiss, we don't hug, we don't touch. And so there's a sense of like, this is going to be my person. Like I'm going to date this person, like with the intention of making my life with them and committing my life to them without the cross, once we cross that physical space where a lot of those chemicals in the brain start getting activated, it makes decision making a little bit different. It can cloud our decision making. And so it's kind of, we hold back on that part of the relationship until we're saying, this makes sense. And once I'm married, I'm going all in because I'm going to make the commitment that I'm going to work very hard to do everything I can to make a really special relationship with this person. And so that gets trained, like that attitude gets kind of ingrained at a pretty young age, because that is the culture. My wife and I got married pretty young when we were young and dumb. Now we're not as young anymore, but the attitude of like, we're going to make this work. We're very opposite personalities. And so that obviously that rubs, there's friction there, which can be really intense and passionate and beautiful, but it can also be, we have to work this through. But the mentality of like, we are going to work this through. Now, obviously there are situations that are just, they can't. And so they have to, they'll have to part ways. And obviously it's very sad for couples that have to do that. But the mentality of like, we're going all in, and we know we're going to have to work really hard. Like that's an inculcated attitude.
It's interesting. I often point out to couples, and I make sure to say when I point this out that I have no data, or I know of no research about this, and maybe you do actually. I think it'd be hard to do research on this particular question. Seems to me that if you compare cultures that arrange, that set up a shidduch, that arrange marriages, with cultures sort of like kind of mainstream American culture where we pick each other out. Although I can comment on even that. You said you were introduced by friends. That's true of a lot of people, who wouldn't say it's an arranged marriage. But I would guess that the rate, and if I measure success simply in terms of is the couple happy to be together and stays together, that it's comparable. I don't think it's necessarily, again, all things aren't equal, so you really can't, you couldn't do a controlled study of this. Right. But that concept, what I often point out to couples who come to see me, again, sort of mainstream American couples, no matchmaking involved, is, well, right now you're in an arranged marriage because, you woke up this morning and here you are married, And so regardless of how you got there in the first place, right, you're in this arranged marriage. And a lot of the attitude I'll hear from folks, I've long since given up making predictions about how it's going to go. Because I know my predictions are usually worse than chance. I don't know, and I'm always surprised, and I just don't bother predicting. But there are some couples you can sort of look back, and the ones who have that kind of faith basis. I don't necessarily mean religious, but that faith basis that says what you were saying about, we know we're going to work this out because we are in this. That's the orientation. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who are probably going to find a way to get through crises, be it infidelity or something else. They'll get through the crises because they'll tolerate the anxiety of understanding, wow, this is meaningful, we have to work with this. The ones that aren't so sure about that are the ones that tend to just say this is too overwhelming, and they end up breaking up. But do you know of any research about that? Or I'm not even sure one could do it because I don't think they're comparable.
Offhand, I do not. It is definitely a fascinating thing to, to look into and to consider. It's like, yeah, but I don't know offhand.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that. I think that sense that when the couples that I see, again, mostly not in the Jewish community or the Orthodox community, um, I think I would really, echo that, where couples that have that like faith of the relationship, like we are invested, we want to make this work, like that that high level of motivation, like
Yeah.
this really matters to me.
Mhm.
And I would say it gets sometimes amplified when there are children. I think it makes a certain weightiness
Yeah.
when, but not exclusively. But I think that does add another layer to it. And couples will say, like, I'm not giving up on my husband. I'm not giving up on my wife, not giving up on my spouse just because we've gone through this major bump. It's like, okay, that's like, great. You're in, like, you want this.
Yeah.
Mm,
And they can get through that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do premarital counseling?
I do some premarital counseling. Um, I'm trying to say the right way to say this. I really love when things are like take some serious work. And the premarital counseling, the pushy eyed, they're all like, yeah, like you think you need to go through some hard knocks, and then I'm like, yeah, let's now that I think that
That's
has
something. Yeah.
that's that old joke with the donkey. I don't know if you're talking donkey trainer, looking for a donkey trainer. Okay, donkey trainer, it's without any, we won't hurt your donkey. We won't do anything bad to the donkey. And so he says, okay, so this guy's like, well, great. He's not going to hurt my donkey. Great. Let me hire this. This guy hires him, sees the donkey's really out of control. He's like, hold on a second. He goes to his truck and, he, hits the donkey with a 2x4. Okay. Peter would be upset. And I'm just a joke. It's just a joke. But so he hits the donkey.
No animals were harmed in this joke, right?
And the owner says, sir, I thought you said there's no harm in the donkey. You don't harm the donkey in the training. He said, no. This is before the training. I just needed to get its attention. But sometimes for couples, I think sometimes they need to be like, oh gosh, like this isn't that Disney tale that we're walking arm in arm in the sunset because we got married. It's like,
yeah.
And so I do some premarital counseling. And I think for me, I like getting in the trenches with the couples when things have gone, not great. And now they're ready.
I've noticed that too in my own work, that there are folks, not many, but there have been folks over the years that seem to just like therapy. And okay, but it's no fun for me. It's like, no, I don't want the people who like therapy. I'm not trying to make them suffer. Like, yeah, I don't want to harm the animal,
Right.
And I'm not going to clop them on, with a 2x4 either. But life has just clomped them with a 2x4.
Right.
And those are the situations I want to work with. It's, I'm not interested in the sort of, well, we'll just be better if we are always talking about this. I mean, again, I respect that, but it's just not much fun for me. I'd rather be working with folks who are working on something real that's inspiring.
Yeah.
The way people are able to contend with really hard stuff. That's what I find so inspiring about the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it gets to that point, I usually say to my couples, I'm like, well, my training is that my goal for you guys is that I'm obsolete.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we might have gotten there. And it's like, yeah. I say, I'm not going to close the door and you're always welcome to reach out. But my goal is to get you kind of, as my mother-in-law, who happens to be a therapist as well, she says their goal of raising kids is have roots and wings. Mm-hmm. And so I try to say, like same kind of I want you to have the concepts and I want you to be able to I want you to know how to dig yourself out without me.
Yeah.
Good words to live by.
Good words to live by.
And
indeed.
good words to end by.
And that's, sounds like a good place to end.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
this has been delightful.
David.
We really appreciate your getting in touch with us, and that's just been great. Do you have like a website or something if people?
So I'm actually in the middle of developing a whole website. But if people want to reach out to me, dfredman, that's Fredman, dfredman.mft at Gmail.
Great. And we will put that on the screen when this
perfect.
Up. Great.
Thank you so much.
We were curious. How did you find us?
I've been, you know what? I'm a podcast junkie. And a therapist, I like to listen to I like to listen to intelligent people talk.
And nevertheless, you found us.
I like to, excuse me, I like to listen to people, and I respect, the podcast. I really listen to a number of the programs, and there's a certain, you guys have a certain fun energy between the two of you that I enjoy as well. And it's, and so, yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks
thank you so
again for
much for
doing this.
reaching out to us, and this was just delightful. So thank you,
Very welcome. Thanks, guys.
and have a good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye.
So we hope you enjoyed that interview with Rabbi Fredman, with David Fredman, and we just had a great time with him. Lovely man. Seems like he's a great therapist. And just wanted to say, if you have any topics that you would like us to talk about, if you have questions like our listener question today, and if there's anything else, if there are subjects you want us to address, I think I said that already, you know how to contact us. Email bruce@brucechalmer.com or visit brucechalmer.com.
And when you visit brucechalmer.com, that's where you can find any of our podcast episodes. That's brucechalmer.com/podcast, or the podcast tab there. And you can also get a hold of my book there, the books tab. There's the book again, Reigniting the Spark, and et cetera, et cetera. Please check out the book. And when you do that, by the way, put a review, we hope a 5-star review, especially on the Amazon site. I mean, the way things are today, that's how people find out about books. Whether or not they buy it there. You don't have to buy it there, but it'd be great if you would review it there. And also tell your friends about that as well. And let folks know about the podcast. And let's not forget about our merch. Our merchandise is available at brucechalmer.com/shop. So please avail yourself of that as well.
So remember, until next time, be kind,
don't panic,
and have faith.